Okay, well, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. We are going to get started because we have a lot to cover and this is being recorded. So for those that don't join right away, they'll be able to watch the recording later on. But let's get started here. So today's MEC Lunch and Learn webinar is on the topic of reoccurring purchase lines. So we'll go ahead and just talk a little bit quickly about Mount Evans Consulting. We pride ourselves in knowing that no matter the size of the scope or the project, we have impact to our clients. If you're new to the webinars or new to Mount Evans Consulting, we do a lot of BC implementations, BC support, rescuing bad implementations, all of that fun stuff we support. A little bit about me. My name is Kristen Hossman. I'm the president at Mount Evans Consulting, also the founder. I'm located just outside of Denver, Colorado. I'm a Microsoft MVP within business applications. I'm actually one of, I think we're up to like 60 or 65 BC MVPs worldwide now. We just got some new MVPs awarded March 1st. So that's pretty exciting. I also am a volunteer for Dynamics User Group, Doug. I sit on the advisory board. If you are thinking about coming to Denver in May for Dynamics Con Live event, I do have a 15% off code there. So if you haven't registered yet and you're looking at coming, go ahead and register. Chris, who's on the team here, Chris Lindsay, and I are going to be speaking together. We're going to be talking about, we're live now. How do we maintain continuous improvements and things like that once we get on BC? And then Chris also has a session with his fantastic sister who happens to work at Microsoft as well. They're going to be talking about Business Central and creating Power BI reports. I do believe that they're going to be sampling a little bit on how to create them, but talking about how to integrate them and different things like that as well. So they will have some pretty good samples there. If you're going to Dynamics Con Live, you definitely are not going to want to miss that session. Okay, so let's jump into the topic at hand here. Let me make sure that you guys are still seeing my screen. But what we're going to talk about today is how we can use recurring purchase lines to help us with transactional processing or, processing vendor invoices. The concept that I'm going to share with you today, you can also take that concept and utilize it from a customer standpoint. So if you have customers that order the same things or have some sort of like reoccurring bill that happens monthly, weekly, quarterly, yearly, things like that, you can use the same concept that I'm going to be sharing with you today. All right, so let's get started. So I'm in a demo environment here. This is my sandbox environment that I'm playing in today. And let's just kind of set the stage. Let's say that I have a vendor. We'll say Verizon, wireless, telephone, utilities, things like that are coming on a reoccurring basis. Right now I'm manually coming in and I'm having to manually create the purchase invoice. I'm selecting the vendor. I'm putting in the invoice date. I'm coming in and I'm manually selecting these accounts right here. So let's just say that this is a travel expense that happens every single month. And I go ahead and I put my quantity and the dollar amount. Okay. So as an accounts payable clerk or, someone dealing with vendor invoices, that may not seem that tedious, but when you have a stack of 50 plus invoices that need to be entered on any given day, that takes a lot of time. So where reoccurring purchase lines come into play is it's a concept that allows you to create these lines as really a template. And then you can assign that to vendors. So you may have a template for, internet expense. Maybe you get, for me, I'm thinking about me. I work from home. I have CenturyLink internet and I have Starlink internet. I have to have a backup, right? So for me, I go in and I set up a reoccurring purchase line for internet expense. I can assign that to CenturyLink vendor and I can assign it to Starlink. And that's really where the magic happens. Okay, so let's kind of take this a little step further. And internet's a really good one. Let's go ahead and let's go into the chart of accounts. Again, this is just a development sandbox, but let's make sure that I actually have an internet GL account number. And I do. I'm just going to use this one. I'll use 63160. I'm just writing that down so I remember it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the lookup and I'm going to type in reoccurring purchase lines. Okay. And from here, I'm going to click new. And this is really that template that I was talking about that you can then apply to a vendor, assign to a vendor. So when you're creating an invoice, it automatically will bring in this information. So the code, I'm just going to call this internet. Okay, so these are all out of the box fields. If you're dealing with multi-currency, you definitely want to put the currency code in here. Now, this is going to be your line section that shows up when you go to do that purchase invoice. So in this scenario, we're hitting a GL account 63160. And it's always going to be quantity 1. And, let's say that because CenturyLink is $50 a month, Starlink is $90 a month. Maybe I don't want to put the amount in here, but if they were the same amount and I was assigning this to the same vendor, then I could put the same amount in here and it would just populate. What you're seeing over here are the dimensions. So if you have global dimensions set up or shortcut dimensions set up in your system, then you will actually see those listed here because those are going to be part of the template. So let's say that, internet always needs to have this code to it. It doesn't make sense that it's manufacturing, but that's besides the point. And then maybe, it's something like this, right? So if you have like a department or an office, something like that for a dimension that is always the same on that transaction, then you can go ahead and put this in here as well. The other thing you can do is you can use this for items. So I actually do have a client right now that does not issue purchase orders. They just totally against that type of thing. But they're dealing with inventory items. So like they're buying things and then they're reselling it. Okay. So you can also use these reoccurring purchase lines and create things like to hit an item. So in this scenario, they're not doing purchase orders, but they still need to enter inventory into the system so the quantities are there. So you could do something like that as well. The other nice thing here is that you can do comments. So you can just have these comments in here so they're reoccurring, right? But this is really all you need. And I did add the variant code here. I wasn't sure who was going to join the call today. We do have a client that uses variant codes as well. So I just wanted to highlight to them that you could utilize variant codes on here as well if you need that. If you open this window and you're not seeing a field that I'm showing you right now, I believe this amount excluding tax, unit of measure, and the variant code, those don't show up out of the box, like just on this window. So you may need to come up and do a personalize. This would allow you to add fields to the window that exist in the table that aren't already exposed on the page. So for example, if I come in here and I just kind of set this back to out of the box, you're going to see the variant code's not here anymore. We don't have that extended price in here anymore, and we don't have the unit of measure. So all you have to do is come up to personalize, add a field, and drag and drop it where you want it to go. And then for those of you on the call who don't know what a personalization is, anytime you come up here and do a personalize, that's a user personalization. It's not going to affect any other users in your system. If you do need that personalization to stick so that it affects everybody, then you're looking at doing a profile role customization, which then you could, whatever profile role you wanted to hit and make that update, you could do that over there as well. So if you're not familiar with what those are, just reach out to us. But I have this set up. This is really my working template of what it is. I see that my comment disappeared. That is not good. That should have stayed. I feel like that disappeared when I personalized, so we may have just identified a bug, possibly. But I will see if I can replicate that after the call. So we have a comment in there. We have everything in there. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now, on this recurring purchase lines window, you can have as many templates set up as you want. So think about like any of those recurring things, utilities. It could be employee expense reports. For example, for me, I submitted an expense report every single month for telephone, internet, and mileage, right? So I would create a template here for expense reports, and then I would add 3 lines on it: telephone, internet, mileage, expense, right? The next step here is to assign this to the vendor. So now that we have internet set up, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go to my vendor list. And I'm going to look at my vendors, and I'm going to say, okay, this vendor, Dynamics User Group, is a vendor in which every single month they send me an internet bill. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and open that vendor card. And where we're going to find to set this up, where it is to set this up, is under related. If you're not seeing related up on your action bar, you just need to say more options. If you're still not seeing it, maybe someone hit it, you don't have access to it, different things like that, right? But we're going to say related, and then we're going to say purchases. And what I'm looking for here is reoccurring purchase lines. And I'm going to click on that. Now, I can have multiple reoccurring purchase lines assigned to the same vendor. The key here is that if I say Dynamics User Group, I get an invoice that needs to get coded to internet, we have some options over here. Okay, so we have quote, order, invoice, and credit memo. Now, this specific vendor, we don't create quotes for, so I'm just going to leave it. We don't create purchase orders for them, but we create invoices. So I have a couple different options. I have automatic, which when I create the purchase invoice, it will automatically create that line for me, or I have always ask. So on the invoice, let's go ahead and say automatic, and on the credit memo, let's say always ask, and then I'll show you what it looks like for each of those options, okay? So let's go ahead and close that. I'm going to go ahead on the vendor card here, and I'm going to click new document, purchase invoice. Now, when I click on purchase invoice from a vendor card, it's going to automatically populate the vendor information over here. If you do it through like just a blank purchase invoice, then you have to automatically populate and select the vendor. So that's really the difference here between what I just did and what it looks like the different ways. But let's go ahead and put a vendor invoice number in here. I'm just kind of starting top to bottom. Now, in order for the reoccurring purchase lines to be enabled, you have to have the vendor number in here. So if this is blank, if I just come up here and I start a new purchase invoice, All of this is blank, and so is the line section, okay? It's not until I select the vendor that those lines are then automatically added to the purchase invoice. So that's the trigger, is populating the vendor number or name and then kind of clicking out of that field. Now, on the purchase invoice here in the previous setup, we had said, hey, we want this to automatically be added to the purchase invoice. That was the selection that we picked. So that's exactly what happened. We have our GL account being that internet account. We have the comment line that was on there as well. We don't have the dollar amount here because we didn't populate that in the reoccurring purchase lines. And remember, we didn't populate that because in my example, I pay CenturyLink $50 a month. I pay Starlink $90 a month. So if I'm in an AP, I'm just like looking at the invoice now and I'm like, okay, this one is, the $90 one. Okay. So that's really all they have to do then at the AP level, other than just making sure the dimensions are correct. Maybe it needs to be changed for some reason. But you can see now how that quickly, just makes the process a little bit easier. And the other reason why I like reoccurring purchase lines, especially if you're doing comments, several of you on the call may be actually making comments and updating descriptions here as well. My OCD kind of kicks in when I'm looking at the general ledger entries window and someone spells something wrong, or it's not in the same format that they've been using the last 3 months and they've decided a new format. When you're using the reoccurring purchase lines, it allows you to kind of stick with the format, right? If you put your description in there how you want it to show in here, there's really no need then for anybody to ever change it, unless maybe the format changes, then you'd want to go update it. But this also just kind of safeguards to make sure that those transactions have consistency across the board, okay? So let me go ahead and post this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get an error message. Hold on, you need to enter a document number. Oh, did I not do that? No, I did that in the other one. Remember, I created a new one. So let's go ahead and post now. It's being extra slow. These messages right here, by the way, if you're still getting these are just notifications and you can actually turn these off. They're very annoying, extra clicks, but no, we don't want to see the posted invoice, okay? The reason this one is here is because this was the original one and then I did plus to add a new one. So we're just going to close that as well. So now we're back at our vendor card. We've set up reoccurring purchase lines. We've assigned it through the reoccurring purchase lines on the vendor. On the credit card, or the credit memo, not credit card, credit memo. On the credit memo, we told it to always ask us. So on that vendor invoice one, we said automatic, but on the credit memo, we said always ask. So let's see what that looks like. Now, if I go to purchase credit memo from the vendor card, remember I'm doing this from the vendor card, so it's automatically going to populate this information for me. But as soon as I click out of this vendor number, something's going to happen. I get this blue notification across the top, and it says reoccurring purchase lines exist for this vendor. Do you want to insert them? Okay. If I click on get reoccurring lines, I then get to see all the reoccurring lines associated to the vendor, and I can select which one I want to pick. So, in this scenario, this is a perfect example of where you may have a vendor that invoices you for multiple unique things, but on a reoccurring basis. So you could actually set up reoccurring purchase lines for each one of those. Think of like benefits like Unum, and they're going to send like maybe 2 separate invoices but it's the same vendor. You could set up 2 separate reoccurring purchase line templates, assign them to that vendor, and then when someone in AP goes to create that invoice, this pops up, and then they say, okay, this invoice is related to dental, this one is related to medical. They both get paid to the same vendor, but I'm entering this invoice first, so I'm going to select that one. Okay, so that's really that concept. And then the same thing is happening. Those lines are coming in. You're going to go ahead and put in that dollar amount. The dimensions are already coming over from the template. If you're using default dimensions at a vendor level in this scenario, those also come in here as well. But it's always just a good thing to verify before you go ahead and post. So let's go ahead and post that. All right, that credit memo has been posted. That's really it. I mean, we've taken about 20 minutes now, and I've shown you how to set it up, how to assign it to the vendor, and how to utilize it. Let's take it kind of a little bit of a step further. And let's talk about just another, I guess, tips and tricks. Now we can kind of just go into tips and tricks for a little bit. But let's talk about another scenario that I get asked a lot. I have a client that asked me, well, if I'm using reoccurring purchase lines, is there a way for me to show or to tell the system, hey, this invoice has been already paid? So think about the scenarios where, you call a vendor and they say, think of utilities. That's always a good one. Everything's on auto pay these days. So like, think about a vendor like that. So Starlink is auto paid. They just hit my credit card or my debit card monthly. But we still want to enter that invoice into the subledger. So think about a scenario like that. Okay. So we have our reoccurring purchase line set up for inventory. But what we can do at a vendor level is we can tag that vendor in such a way that it tells the system that, hey, when we post this invoice, we want it to show already paid. Okay, so that's the concept. Okay. So I'm going to go a step here, and I'm going to go up to the global search, and I'm going to look for payment method. Now, if you've been on Business Central for a while, you may understand already the concept of a balance account, especially if you're doing like general journal entries and you're doing like a single line entry. But what this allows you to do is it allows you to come in here and let's say that Starlink, for example, hits my debit card. Okay, debit, DEBI. Oh goodness gracious. Debit card. Okay. And then let's say we're just going to set one up too, like we have an American Express. So we'll just set that up too. So let's say that the debit card is tied to our main bank account. And let's say that if they charge our American Express, it could be tied to a different bank account if you're running it through a bank account, or it could be, applied to a liability account if you're running it through a liability account. There's a couple different ways to handle credit cards. So if you're doing it one way and not the other, that's fine too. We're just going to dump it to pretend this account's at American Express. Okay. So what I'm telling the system now is that if I use payment method, direct debit or debit card, if I use this payment method, it's going to automatically close and show paid via this bank account. Okay, so you have to be really, really careful with payment methods, and you really have to understand not only how they're set up, but maybe why they were set up that way. Okay, so you can see like a lot of these have blank balance accounts. One of them's check, right? So this is a perfect example of where a client is like, well, this vendor, we want to pay via check. This vendor, we pay via debit card, right? What a lot of clients will do because they think that this is the right setup, they will come in on the check and they will say the checks are printed from bank account B10. Well, what happens when they enter that invoice and they post it, it automatically shows paid. And then we get a support ticket saying, hey, why are these invoices automatically showing paid? We haven't paid them yet. This is why, because they have this populated. You can still use check in here. That's fine. It's an information only then type field. But as soon as you put that balance account number and populate that, it now becomes like a process, right? So I hope that makes sense. If that doesn't make sense, throw it in the chat and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But in this scenario, we're going to use this debit one, okay? So on this vendor card right here, I'm going to come down to the payment section and I'm going to tell it that the payment method code is debit. Now, as soon as I put that on the vendor card, I'm really telling it that, hey, 100% of the time, we're using the debit card. If you're not 100% of the time using a debit card to pay this vendor, do not populate it on the vendor card because someone will forget to remove it before they post, and then you're going to have an issue. Okay, so 100% of the time we're paying with a debit card. Now, when I go and create that purchase invoice, and I put that vendor invoice number in the header. And by the way, when you say show less and show more, when you say show less, you can actually personalize what is showing here out of the box. So if you don't like having this open all the time because it takes up your whole screen, just personalize this to kind of make it a little bit better for you. But here, let's go ahead and put this dollar amount in here. We'll do $25. What happens is that payment method code, because we had it set on the vendor card, it automatically comes on the purchase invoice. It would even come on a purchase PO, a quote, well, probably not a quote, but even like a credit memo, right? So like whatever is on the vendor card, when you create the transaction, that's what's getting pulled. If somebody now goes into that vendor and removes the payment method code from it, and I have not posted this invoice yet, the system's not updating this invoice. The system is taking a snapshot of the vendor when you clicked create invoice, and that's what is used. So sometimes I'll get questions like, well, someone went and changed something on a vendor card or a customer card, maybe a name or something like that. But it didn't update anything else that was outstanding. Well, yeah, it's not going to. Okay. So keep that in mind. But here we have payment method code debit. Now, if I come up and do a preview posting, we're going to see where the magic happens. So there's actually 4 journal entries happening. If I did not have a balance account on my payment method, there would only be 2. It would be AP and it would be the expense. Because I have a balance account in there, it's hitting the expense, it's hitting AP as a debit credit, and then it's hitting the bank account right away. So it literally is posting the expense, posting the invoice, but then it's automatically making the payment in the system and showing it paid. That's what's happening here. The other thing that's happening here is that it's hitting the bank account ledger. So because the bank account is a subledger, and the subledgers need to be in sync to the general ledger, it hits the bank account ledger. So here we can see a payment of 25 going out against bank B10. Okay, and it's hitting the bank ledger. It doesn't hit the check ledger because we didn't do a payment journal and print a check. So it skips the check ledger. It goes right to the bank ledger. And then it does all the necessary, it posts the invoice, it posts the payment, and then it applies the payment to the invoice. So it literally is doing everything for you. Some clients, will do their bank reconciliation every month and they'll say, okay, $25 hit my bank account, but the invoice hadn't been entered into BC yet. You could also create this through a general journal entry and kind of skip the subledger. But this example that I'm showing you using the payment method is if you don't want to skip the subledger and you want to be entering those invoices in to the vendor ledger. So let me go ahead and close that, and let's go here and see what happens. So for Dynamics user group, we have a ton of invoices open here. Let's see what we did today. We posted an invoice. We posted a credit memo. We have a ton of columns over here that are forcing me to scroll left and right. So you probably want to personalize this window to kind of clean it up a little bit. Let's say that $15 credit memo needs to be applied to that $90 invoice. You can come in here, select that credit memo, apply entries, and then you can find that invoice for the $90, set applies ID, post that application. Okay, now if you're posting it this way, the vendor doesn't know that you're posting it. Like, it's not going to show on a check stub if you had to like send them a check. They're not going to know you're applying it. So just keep that in mind when you're doing it this way as well. And then let me close that. And then let's go into the payments here real fast. This is where that $25 payment that we did that payment method code on, this is where it's showing up. So it's already telling us that this has been paid. The only issue with payment method codes, I will say, is going to be that the payment date, the posting date matches the posting date of the invoice. So for example, Starlink sends me an invoice today, but they're not taking the money or hitting my bank account until 4/1 or, later in the month, and I use a payment method code, it's going to be sitting as an outstanding item as of today. So that's really the only sticky point on it, is that it's posting immediately. It just, it would be a outstanding unreconciled item with your bank until it closes. Okay, so that really concludes today's webinar.